lot of times when you're in the medical director role, it's hard because you want to be the hands-on guy. And so like, you want to, the guys get to trust you because if something does happen, they know you're going to save their life. You know that
Yeah.
that they've got you. But then all of a sudden, you've got to be able to step back and say, look, like I can't be emotional in this. I've got to make sure I hand you off to the right person for the right situation or the right time.
Yeah.
Not only that, but they may have their guy, and that guy may have ego or that girl may have ego. And like, you don't want to go, you want to be respectful of that because the athlete has to perform. And I've always said, whether, we were on tour with Nitro Circus, if you have your guy or, if I'm working with one of my NFL guys or, MLB, I'm like, hey, who's your team? That's one of the first questions I ask. I say, who's your team? Because I need to know if they have a physio, a chiro, a strength coach, who's their pitching coach, or maybe who's their hitting coach. And then from there, I'm like, can I have their numbers? That way I can like dissolve that pH really quickly. Because a lot of times people are like, well, why are you looking at my athlete? What are you doing? Going back in time, going in, leaving private practice to go into education to create a opportunity for chiropractors to now have unique roles within the sports medicine world, not just from the chiropractic perspective, but also from the managerial perspective, understanding how to work as a team was a unique thing. I've always taken care of my athletes, even through the educational portion at the Institute, leaving there, working with TPI and Rack Fit on Base. But I think from the medical director perspective, you really have to have a bunch of different hats and you have to be able to understand different languages. And I think sometimes as chiropractors, we like to stay on our own little island and, we forget that there's a ton of other like different islands out there. And that if we can collaborate, we can get different resources and actually create a lot of cool things for our own individual island that may have never, ever happened. You know what I mean? Again, I'm just using those same skill sets from the medical director world that taught me a lot on how to like be collaborative instead of, combative or competitive.
We are gap jumping tricycles and bikes over 400-foot buildings.
We're dream makers. What can I tell you? Making dreams and nightmares come true.
This does not look safe at all.
Not just Nitro, but other sports. I mean, throughout Europe and then obviously like Southeast Asia. But one of the things that comes to mind is when we were in South Africa, we had a 3-stop tour between, Durban, Cape Town, and Johannesburg. I was really excited about is that we were connected with Fix already, you know what I mean? Because I had done my master's. And so I went on and I talked to, obviously the Federation of International Chiropractors, but then more importantly, through my emergency medicine fellowship, I was able to reach out to a bunch of different people and start to make these connections. And so when we landed in Africa, I already had chiro set up. I had PT set up. I had, contacted all the emergency trauma hospitals. I had everything set up so that way when we got there, if I needed a script from one of our guys that, was sick or whatever else happened, I had an MD on call. So it's really learning how to, and not only that, but their laws are way different. For instance, you can't just go into certain areas. Like there, I make a phone call and it's behind the scenes and, we're getting the guy in immediately. We're getting everything checked. I think when you're working internationally, you got to be protective about your license. Number one, you got to be really mindful about what the country's rules are. Like, what are you allowed to do? So from the medical perspective role, like I didn't treat in some of those areas because it was against the law for me to treat outside of that part. However, when I was with the team, we were within like our hotel, I'm allowed to do that there, but on site, they have different rules, regulations, laws, insurance. So that's when you have to have that collaborative role. If you come to the table humble, and you listen to what that person's complaint is or why they're complaining or why they have a problem, usually you can dissolve the situation very quickly. And I tell, I would say this to a lot of chiros that want to get into the sports world that, know your role, know your lane, especially if you're trying to get in with a professional team. If you're there as the chiropractor, be there as the chiropractor and doing a really good job until they notice you and they notice how good you are. And like, and that's kind of, how I've been. It's like, I'm not afraid to show up early and make sure that all the coffee's ready, everything's ready for our staff, and then staying late and cleaning up and like doing the reports. So it's more than just being a chiropractor sometimes. And I think being a chiropractor, we have a responsibility and a unique role of being able to kind of do more than a lot of professionals because we have a philosophical background. Like everybody wants to see people healthy and happy and performing. But I think genuinely as a chiropractor, a lot of people came into our role because their lives were changed because of chiropractic. And that being said by itself is something that I think is so important that, And it gives me goosebumps because I love what we do. And now being back in practice, I'm getting to see it again, right? You get to see these miracles happen day in and day out. We have a really dang good educational background. And once people realize that and they can understand that you understand differential diagnosis, that you can work as a team player, I mean, people want chiropractors. I'm telling you that right now, especially pro athletes. You know, make sure you have enough tools in your toolbox, but that you have a good system. Like the biggest thing that, you know, I hear when I'm referring chiropractors to different teams, because they'll call me and say, hey, do you have a chiro in this area? I personally look to see who maybe has SFMA, so selective functional movement assessment, or if it's a certain type of thing, I'm making sure they have on-base use certification so they can at least talk the lingo. So I don't just send them there and they know nothing about the sport. Like I want to know, do you know what you're working with? Like I know when we talk about, you know, downhill mountain biking, you know the language, you know what's going to happen, you know the risks, you know the injuries, you know potentially how to make them perform better. I wouldn't put a random person into that role.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I was an annoying that. I'm one of these guys that when I want something, like I'm going to show up. I don't care if a seminar is, you know, 3,000 miles away. Like, you know, I'll go. And I think one of the biggest things that people miss out on is they go to these seminars, right? And they don't make relationships. They go and they listen, they try to get the cert and they go home and they think that it's going to build their practice. On the other hand, I'm always asking questions. I go introduce myself to the instructor. I make sure I always send them a thank you card or a thank you email. And then I'm like, if they're getting ready to go to lunch, if they don't look like anybody's going with them or they don't have, I'm like, hey, do you mind if I go to lunch? Can I stay after? Can I get a drink with you? Because here's the deal. It's like, you're learning this much inside of a weekend seminar or maybe a day seminar, right?
Yeah.
But you can learn this much by creating a relationship. And not only that, but creating a true friendship of being able now, like say for instance, you know, like I'll just take fascial manipulation for instance. I took it with structure and function recently. And what I learned in that course, I mean, it's like an overload. It's like literally opening up a fire hydrant and just like being blown away.
Yeah.
But because I've kept in contact with the instructor, I'm reaching out to him. I'm like, hey, so I went after this point, this point, and this point. I saw some great results, but now I'm at a standstill. He's like, oh, well, did you do this, this, and this? And because of that, we've created a relationship, and now we're referring patients back and forth together. He's in Atlanta, I'm here. But now it's opened up an international world. And so when I was at Life West, and we were opening up their Sports Performance Institute, I really wanted to bring the SFMA into the program. And so at the time, I reached out to Michelle Desser, who's their coordinator. And she's like, you know, I was randomly going to be in Chicago with a buddy of mine working on a subluxation paper looking at HRV. We're taking the whole weekend to go through all these research things like nerds. And Greg Rose is in Chicago. So I'm like, Matt, let's go and meet Dr. Rose. So we literally drive over and meet Greg. And I'm like, I have this idea, like, this is what I want to bring to Life West, but I would love to see like the chiropractic world have a performance certification, not a sports quote medicine certification. Like, let's focus on performance. And he's like, interesting. Tell me more about that. And so we started talking, and then he's like, what if I told you I'm in the process of doing something very similar? And we've got TPI right now in golf, but I'm looking at going into baseball and tennis. And I'm like, I'm in. Tell me how I can be part of this. And we kept going back and forth, and we were sending each other emails and texts. He's like, okay, I'm going to do this tennis thing. I got the USPTA on board, and I've got this going. And so I turned my resignation into Life West because I saw this as an opportunity to really build something that we could really enhance, and then we could also give to the colleges. So we spent 2.5 years building out the screens, building out the characteristics, putting advisory boards together. And so we launched them. So we launched Racket Fit 3 years ago. We launched On Base U 2 years ago. And then COVID hit, and it was like, what am I going to do? I'm one of those guys, I can't sit still. So I ended up moving here, and Greg and I still have a great relationship, and I'm still, you know, being able to help teach and do things that we do with what we're doing. But right now that's the COVID world. And what's neat is that so many more people have been opened up to TPI, to On Base U, to Racket Fit that may have not been able to travel. And now you have practitioners and fitness professionals and coaches understanding these languages that we talked about in the beginning of this talk. So think about how that's going to enhance sport in the next 10 years, as long as we can like screen, properly assess for that sport, and then give them the proper care. You know, so we haven't really even announced that we've opened. We've kind of just done a soft opening since November. And we're doing good. You know, definitely staying within a very consistent pace. We're growing at an organic pace and bringing some of that elite science stuff and technology that I've used in the past, 4 years. So we've got Tracer, we've got Blaze Pods. So we're bringing a lot of cognitive and reactive training in with the adjusting, so that way the body can adapt quicker. Different tools like that. So it's hard for me because I'm used to being on the road 40 something weeks a year. And I get antsy and I'm like, oh man, I'm in a routine. Like I'm waking up at 5:30 or 6. It's a different world because everybody was like, how do you travel that much? I'm like, it was easy for me. It was like I was just on a constant cortisol ride. I enjoyed it. I was like, here, there, eating different food, meeting different people, and then I was out. I was blessed. I had a really, really amazing education at Life University. But also, I think that it doesn't matter what school you're at, it's what you attract and what you're willing to do while you're in school. I probably took 13 or 14 certifications while I was in school. I was trying to mentor under anybody I could. I went and knocked on every chiropractor's door around the area. I was involved in ambassadors. So I got to be around a lot of really good people, but it was because I put myself out there, right? And I think a lot of students that are like, man, I got a crappy education, I put that on them. I'm like, well, what were you doing? Because I can tell you right now, I've been on most of the campuses around the country and around the world. And whether you're at a straight or you're at a vitalistic or you're at a salutogenic, whatever you want to call them, there's some phenomenal professors in that area. And I'll tell you what, if they're not on your campus, they're around, and you just didn't feel like going and reaching out to those people. So I would say that I had a really good education. Now, have I learned a heck of a lot more since I got out of school? Absolutely. I'm not going to accept the fact that my education is what it is. Like, if I know what I want to do, I'm going to try to reach out to whoever it is. I'm going to network. I'm going to ask them if I can shadow. I'm going to ask them if I can be involved. And same thing should happen when we get out of school. Like even now, I'm always reaching out. You and I talk all the time, and we're always like, hey, what do you think about this person? They'll reach out to us and like, all right, they're cool. Okay, cool. I'll connect them with so-and-so. So even as a practitioner, like if there's something you want to do, reach out to those people. Like you're only limited by your minimal belief. Like you said earlier in the call, if you have a passion like Eric does for swimming or Steve has for like teaching, go after it because you're going to be successful.